Abraham Shakespeare was a humble man who went from struggling to afford lunch to winning $30 million overnight. But what should have been a dream turned into a nightmare. Betrayal, greed, and a shocking disappearance. But let's find out what really happened to the man who had it all. How it all began. Abraham Lee Shakespeare was born in Lake Wales, Florida on April 24th of 1966. He was born into poverty and his struggles began from a young age. His family could barely afford to feed him and his sibling, let alone provide a complete formal education. He was a hard worker who valued friendship, and everyone he ever worked for had nothing but nice things to say about him. He would spend his early life taking on labor-intensive jobs to help pay the bills, and he worked all kinds of jobs, even taking multiple shifts just to make ends meet. He worked as a cleaner at a barber shop for a man named Greg Smith who had helped him through his struggles, and you might want to remember that name as he becomes an important piece of the puzzle later on. Abraham also had other jobs like being a truck driver and a field worker. He didn't make much, and he was kind and absolutely generous. Perhaps a little bit too generous, a virtue that would lead to his later downfall. He'd always thought about how it would feel to be able to get out of the struggle, to be able to afford anything that he wanted in life. He had felt cheated in life by his lack of education and felt as though he didn't have what it took to compete. The consciousness of his disadvantages made him work twice as hard, and he already had a few mouths to feed as a father of two, and at that point in his life what he really needed was a miracle. And in 2006, that miracle finally came.
Every gambler has that one story, the time they beat the odds and hit it big. Now it's your turn to create your story and become a main character in our future videos. Welcome to Crypto Rush, where luck meets opportunity in the world of crypto gambling. Deposit crypto, play your favorite games, and cash out in seconds. Crypto Rush brings the joy and excitement of a casino to your fingertips. Click the first link in the description and start your winning streak today. Use code CR50 to get $50 free to play on slots, casino games, or the sportsbook. Crypto Rush, where legends are made.
The Lucky Ticket. On November the 15th of 2006, Abraham was on a truck driving shift with a colleague delivering meat to Miami. Both individuals were not only colleagues but also friends and often shared stories about each other's lives. On their way back from the delivery, they stopped at the convenience store to grab a bite to eat and maybe get anything else they needed. That's when the colleague asked Abraham if he wanted anything. Abraham, upon realizing he was short on cash, had asked the man to get him 2 quick pick tickets. He happily paid for the tickets, and it was the last thing he could do for a friend, but little did he know it was that kind gesture that would turn the friendship upside down. The next day, his colleague noticed that Abraham didn't show up for work as usual. He called to check on him and was both shocked and devastated to hear that Abraham had just won $30 million in the Florida lottery. One of the tickets that the man had generously paid for had the winning numbers, and Abraham didn't need that job anymore because he was now a millionaire. That same man that he watched struggle for pennies and even borrowed money from for lunch was now a wealthy celebrity overnight. The colleague, whose name was Michael Ford, was mystified by it all. Abraham couldn't believe the surreal experience. He could now afford whatever he wanted, and though he had won $30 million, he chose the lump sum and after taxes took home an impressive $17 million. Abraham's winnings had not even hit the bank before all hell broke loose though, because what happened next would shatter the bonds of friendship. The Entitlement Lawsuit. Michael Ford had a big problem with Abraham's new status. He felt that the ticket that made Abraham an overnight millionaire was purchased by him with his money, and therefore it may as well have been his ticket. He filed a lawsuit against Abraham, claiming that he deserved at least half of the winnings because he had bought the tickets as a collaboration rather than a favor out of goodwill. Abraham denied the statement and refused to share his fortune with Ford. The court would eventually rule in favor of Abraham as the rightful winner. Ford became depressed and broke as he had spent a lot of money hiring a lawyer. Abraham, on the other hand, tried to focus on his new celebrity status and wealth, but this was only the beginning of his problems. A generous spender. Abraham was not the kind of man to hoard wealth from his family and friends. He neither lived a flashy lifestyle, nor did he party away his money or go on expensive vacations. According to reports, he had bought a home in a gated community and a few vehicles, but most of his money actually went to helping out friends and family. As soon as he got his winnings, he began receiving calls from all over. Strangers would call multiple times a day, pleading for some money to solve their problems. People even called from prison. One thing that Abraham was not good at was saying no. He ended up giving out so much money that he bought houses for friends, paid off mortgages and debts for people he barely knew, and handed out cash to anyone who had a good sob story. Within the first few years, Abraham was down by $10 million. He had no financial education and didn't know how much harm he was doing to himself. He just felt the urge to make a difference to everyone around him. He cared more about how he was perceived and was clueless to the damages that came with his kind gestures. In an interview, he was once asked why he was so generous, and he said that he would rather be broke and help people than to be rich and lonely. This explained how isolated that he felt after winning the lottery and his need for approval by the people around him. Unbeknownst to him, his generosity had made him an easy target, but then came Doris Moore, the woman everyone came to know as Dee Dee, the financial manager from hell. By 2008, only 2 years after winning the lottery, Abraham Shakespeare was already running low on money. His generosity, combined with a constant flood of people asking for financial help, had drained his bank account faster than he expected, and he was getting tired of everything. In the middle of the chaos, he met Doris Moore, fondly known as Dee Dee. Moore had paraded herself as a businesswoman who wanted to interview him for a book that she was working on, but what he did not know is that she had a history of shady financial dealings and was neck-deep in financial debt. She noticed that Abraham was having problems with managing his own finances, and she claimed that she wanted to help him get his finances back on track. She told him that people were using him because he was just too trusting and had promised to protect him from those who wanted his money. She set up a company under the pretense that it would protect his fortune, when in reality, all she wanted to do was use it to transfer all of his assets to herself under her own name. He trusted her, even though he hadn't known her very long, and she seemed to be honest and genuinely wanted to help. Shakespeare thought that her plan would finally get rid of everyone who was trying to take advantage of him, but it would be the worst mistake of his life. Moore took control of Abraham's bank accounts and even took over the responsibility of recovering the money that he had borrowed from certain friends and family. She withdrew $1 million from his account by herself and bought a few luxury cars like a Hummer, a Corvette, and more, and then treated herself to a lavish vacation. She would forge his signature, transfer his home and assets to her name, and in 2008, something insane happened. Abraham Shakespeare was suddenly nowhere to be found, having vanished from sight and couldn't be reached. The disappearance of Shakespeare. When friends and families couldn't reach Abraham Shakespeare, the first person they reached out to was his so-called financial manager and business partner, Dee Dee Moore. She had told people that Abraham had gone on a trip to avoid people who were always asking for money, and told others that he had moved to Jamaica on a vacation. She even sent out fake messages from his phone to people, pretending to be him, but his mother suspected that something wasn't adding up. He wouldn't leave for that long of amount of time without saying a word, and as things got heated, Moore started to pay people to pretend that they had seen him. In fact, she was so desperate that she had paid a barber by the name of Greg Smith $300 to speak to Abraham's mother and pretend to be Abraham himself. Remember Greg Smith from before? The story begins to come together. Greg did what he did as a favor to Moore, thinking that she probably had a misunderstanding with Abraham and they weren't talking to each other at that moment. But after he did what he did, he was paid $300 as a service, and Moore then sent Greg a text from Abraham's phone saying that he was all right and he would soon be home. Greg was one of the people who knew Abraham quite well. They were good friends, and Abraham had worked for him as a cleaner at his barbershop before winning the lottery. After the lottery, Abraham had helped him to pay off some debt. The one thing that Greg did know about Abraham was that he could neither read nor write, so the question became, who had sent him that text? Obviously, someone who was in control of Abraham's phone and did not want to be found out. More importantly, what had this person actually done with Abraham? In January of 2010, police were hot on Moore's tail as the prime suspect in the disappearance of Abraham, but they needed the proof. That's when Greg Smith stepped in to assist the police to get to the bottom of the case. He agreed to wear a wire and approach Moore in order to get a confession out of her. Moore was completely unaware that she was being recorded and confessed to the crime, and even asked Smith to help her find someone who would take the fall for Shakespeare's disappearance. That's when Greg, along with the police, would set up a sting operation. He pretended to have found a person and then asked her to provide other information to make it look real, like the murder weapon and the place where Abraham was buried. The unsuspecting woman provided the gun that was used to kill Abraham and took Greg to where she had buried his body. The location was her ex-boyfriend's house and in his backyard beneath a concrete slab. The police had gotten out all the evidence that they needed and immediately swooped in, dug up the earth, and found Shakespeare's body. He had been shot twice in the chest and then buried in a shallow grave, and Dee Dee Moore would immediately be placed under arrest and charged with first-degree murder. After a lengthy trial, she was found guilty of fraud and theft because she had not only manipulated her victim but also wiped out his bank account and took all of his physical assets before taking his life. She would then be sentenced to life in prison without parole, and during the trial she showed no remorse, continuing to claim that she was innocent while insisting that Shakespeare had been killed by someone else. Unfortunately, though, the evidence was overwhelming, and Abraham's story was supposed to be a success story from rags to riches, but sadly, it turned into a bitter lesson about trusting the wrong person and how greed destroyed a most generous soul. If Abraham had never won the lottery, perhaps he would still be alive today. What did you think about the winnings and the death of Abraham Shakespeare? Let me know in the comments below. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.